what we're going through and going over. We just concluded the OMA video show. This afternoon is OMA VR AR. And so immediately after lunch, we'll get started with that. So again, thanks to Twitter. I'm welcoming to the stage Heather O'Shea. She's the Global Agency Research Lead for Twitter, and Nick Childs, Chief Creative Officer of Initiative. Please give them your attention. Thank you.
So we decided to sit because the height disparity is a little...
Stand on the chair.
So thanks for having us, though. So I'm Heather O'Shea. As I was introduced, I oversee our research function as it relates to video and agency partnerships here at Twitter. And I'm joined by Nick Childs, who's Chief Creative Officer at Initiative and Society. So really happy to have him here today. He's extremely knowledgeable about advertisers and agencies and how they're thinking about their creative and media strategies as we look at the changing landscape, which he'll talk to. But first, I wanted to take you through a research project we recently wrapped up with the IPG Media Lab. So we partner very closely with IPG in their lab to understand more about shifting video consumption behaviors, and particularly looking at the newsfeed. So a lot of the panels today were talking about bringing video content and advertiser content into newsfeeds and into social. So for us, we want to understand how are consumers absorbing that content and what's the impact on advertisers. So I'll just set the tone to start. Let's see if the clicker actually works here. Nope. Oh, there we go. All right, cool. So setting the tone, 75% of all video will be mobile by 2020. And we see that even more exaggerated on Twitter. 93% of all video views that are happening on Twitter are actually on a mobile device. So that's huge. We know that mobile video is booming and will continue to grow. So just want to take a step back. And I know all of you work in the industry, so you're really familiar with shifting consumption behaviors, but I think it's good to kind of just set some context here. So if we think about not that long ago, watching TV was a shared experience, and it was pretty passive, right? If we wanted to watch Seinfeld, we actually had to wait until Thursday night and wait for it to appear on NBC. So kind of different than it continued to evolve. And it went from this passive experience to a more proactive experience. So it became on demand, right? So people could DVR Seinfeld, which I do on syndication, which sounds kind of ridiculous, or you can watch it on emerging video platforms such as Hulu. So it started to shift. But today, it's really changed quite a bit. It's moved to real time. So from passive to proactive to anywhere, it's really shifted things and flipped it on its head. When we think about news feeds and video consumption there, we're seeing that I could stumble upon Seinfeld 2000 and look at some clips, or even see it mashed up with something that's happening right then in the moment. So it's really about seeking video that we don't even know exists. And this could be happening while we're on our commute. It could be happening when we're on a break in between meetings, or even as we're going to bed at night. And it's much more personal because it's all happening on one's device. So that leads to the question for advertisers, what do we do, right? And that's a pretty important question, if I could get there. Okay. What we're also seeing for mobile is that as they go through their feeds, since it is a more personal, active experience, they are able to take away information at very low levels of exposure. So independent Forrest Marsh tests that were conducted actually found that a very small amount of exposure, as little as a quarter of a second, they were able to recall the content they were exposed to. We actually saw that with research we did at Twitter as well. So it's very different in terms of how people are being exposed. So that leads us to how we want advertisers to make changes. And for us, we know that advertisers need to start thinking differently and thinking about how they might approach their communications to consumers. So as a researcher, it's really important in terms of the work that we do. And we've been approaching research around video in many different ways. All right, so we do all different types of research at Twitter. Around video, we've been doing ongoing body of work and looking at all different types of metrics. So survey-based metrics such as recall and attitudes, but additionally taking it further into biometrics, hooking people up with headsets to understand their neurological response and their attention, but additionally even looking at things like emotional reactions. So what we did with IPG, we worked with IPG to create a whole new app, and it was a version of the Twitter app that consumers would log into, and they would see what they normally see in their Twitter feed, but we can control the advertising messages they were exposed to. So it was really exciting to be able to pick the specific video ads we wanted them to be exposed to and create this really strong laboratory experiment. So we had a group that was set up to be exposed to specific ads that we selected and put within their Twitter feed as a promoted video tweet. And then subsequently, after that exposure, we asked them questions. So do they remember seeing the ad? How did they feel about the brand? All different types of brand metrics. And how did they react to the ad itself? We also set up a separate group of respondents, and we had them click through a premium video site, and they selected what premium videos they wanted to be exposed to. We took those same ads that we had in the Twitter feed, and we inserted them in front of the video that they selected. So they were required to watch the video for 5 seconds, and then they could skip past it. So we're really trying to replicate the types of video environments one might see on their mobile phone, whether it's in a mobile feed or selecting on a premium video site. And that was the basis for our comparison to really understand how being exposed to advertising within a mobile feed, particularly video advertising, could impact advertising response and brand response from consumers. So what we found was that the feed is a really unique environment and an interesting place for advertisers. The first thing we learned was that being exposed to video in the feed actually can drive relevance. So looking at the same exact advertising, we actually saw a 10 percentage point increase when exposed on Twitter, so being exposed as autoplay video in the feed, as opposed to it being on the premium website. And just remember here, we were testing the same exact ads. And taking that a step further, we actually saw that people considered the ads to be less intrusive when they appeared on Twitter. And again, same ads. So we think that part of the reason is because this is a self-curated feed. People are, if I put together my feed, it's my passions and my interests, and I go there with a discovery mindset, expecting to see things that I'm interested in. So I'm more open to advertising at that point in time. So when we found out that it was more relevant, it was less intrusive than premium video, or select a specific video and interrupted by an ad, not all that surprising. But what was really powerful is the impact that this had on ad recall. So we actually saw across all recall metrics that Twitter video outperformed premium video in this instance. And in some cases, we saw that the ads on Twitter were twice as memorable as on premium video. We even saw this for message recall, which we thought was really strong. And taking that even further than that, we looked at brand favorability. So for those that were exposed to the ad on Twitter versus those that were not exposed to the ad, so a control cell, we actually saw an 8 percentage point increase. And this was after a single exposure. Doing the same thing on premium video, there was no change. So having that environment and that context could really change how a consumer feels about the brand. And it's more than just recall, taking it a step further into favorability. What underscores all of this is that, as I was saying, we tried to make this as natural an environment as possible. And we're honest here, right? People aren't necessarily going to be completing the ads. And we talked about this on all of the panels today. They're scrolling through their feed, and if the next piece of content is somebody's kids and that's more exciting, they might spend more time with that. And what we found was that on average, people were spending slightly less time with Twitter video than with the premium video, which they were required to watch at least the first 5 seconds. And despite all of that, we actually did see that Twitter video outperformed the premium video that we tested for the same ads. So our learning here was that time spent isn't necessarily a driver of effectiveness when we're looking at mobile. And so that took us to the second wave of the study. So in the second wave, we focused on viewability. Viewability is such a hot button issue. It comes up all the time. There's a lot of news about it and the right way to measure viewability. And we've worked a lot with the MRC. So when we talked to IPG about setting up this study, we said, let's start with the MRC standards, so the Media Rating Council. And their standard for video across online, mobile, and news feeds at this point in time is that the video player must be 50% in view for at least 2 continuous seconds to count as what we would qualify as a view. And what we did was we broke up the respondents and looked at those that we know met or exceeded that standard, and then we looked at those that we served the ad to but went below that standard and compared that to those that were not exposed at all. And interestingly enough, we did find there's a lot of value gained below that MRC standard. So above the standard obviously outperformed as we expected, but really strong results below that standard. So we went to IPG Media Labs and said, let's unpack this a little bit more. Why do we think there's so much value gained at under 2 seconds of view? And what we came out with is that we think it's because of all the context that the in-feed environment provides outside of the video itself, right? So that's where the brand's handle and the tweet copy adds so much more value in terms of that branding message and something to really think about. That is being taken away by consumers, and it's not even counting in terms of the video view. So what we see here is that at 1 second of view, half of the respondents remember seeing the ad. There's aided ad recall there. What's also interesting is that 3 seconds is a pretty meaningful differentiator. And I know we've talked a lot about 3 seconds at Twitter. That's a pretty standard way that we bill our video advertising. And this helps to prove that, because between 1 second and 3 seconds, there's a very statistical significant lift, but then it's fairly flat until we reach video completion. So that was also very interesting for us to learn and kind of tease up what Nick is going to speak about, because for us, that makes us think it's important to make that impact in that first 3 seconds, right? So something for advertisers to start thinking about. So in terms of what I'd like you to take away today, I have 3 things. So the first being Twitter video offers a curated feed, and this leads to more relevant perception as it relates to the advertising itself. It's considered less intrusive, and this actually drives greater ad recall and favorability compared to premium video environments, and that can happen in as little as 1 second. Keep in mind here that what we tested were 15-second ads, and they were not necessarily optimized for Twitter or thinking about best practices. We worked with IPG to select a variety of advertisers across their portfolio and look at promoted tweets that they had that we knew were running in other environments. So we also worked with them to understand what are some of the best practices here, and Nick is working to start to infuse these best practices and to build assets with that in mind. So I'm going to pass it over to him to take you through some really cool examples from what some of the brands are doing. So thanks, Nick.
Thanks. Oh, good. It's working. So my talk here may be a little bit scattered and disparate, but that's a lot like my Twitter feed. So I'll try to connect things here and there and make it interesting and not be screaming into the void, which is what I'm doing on Twitter a lot of the time. I love Twitter as a platform, and what we're talking about today, I can put in a bigger context of my CEO at Initiative, who hired me, calls me a strategic creative. And That's a good thing for me. I believe in art and science and form and function. I believe that especially in today's modern age, with all of the platforms we can play in and have to play in to connect brand messages with audiences authentically, we have to know why this platform versus that platform, how those platforms are being used by the audience, and most importantly, then what, why, and how are we creating content, that big bucket word of content, but the stories that we're trying to connect with the audiences. So what I love about the work that Kara and IPG Lab did with Twitter was to start to put a framework around best practices so that we can now go to clients with those learnings and infuse that into the way I want to present our creative campaigns so that it makes sense logically to be kind of exploring those iterations on the platform. And I'll go through some of this work. It's a very recent study, so some of the things I'm going to be showing you work against some of these insights, but weren't built specifically for these insights, but they were built from where I come from, you know, filmmaking and writing and the idea of, it reminds me, this is where I get scattered. It reminds me of years ago, I had a film at Tribeca, and Steven Soderbergh talked about how he was making film there. And he was talking about the small screen, and this is 7, 8 years ago. And he was saying, I have to now recut my films. I have to make my films. I have to shoot my films. And he's an editor. So he's actually shooting and framing for a smaller screen 7 years ago. That means less wide shots. That means more close-ups. So it's not new work that this is exploring here. It's been happening for a long time. How do we engage with audiences better through these platforms? But what this study did was to really show us some discrete things either we can look at and choose to ignore over other ways that we're going to make the content, or actually be allegiant to because we know this is how it's playing in the feed. So that's me, and I'm at Initiative, media company under IPG, and also at Society, which is our social offering. But that social offering, to be clear, gets us in the door now with clients to be making content for one platform, be that Twitter, that then potentially becomes content that goes across the stream to other places. So a lot of the work we've been doing recently was specifically created for online and social, but actually is being run on TV at the same time. What do we know and what are we talking about here? Video, I'm going to get up because I need to kind of look at this, but video thriving in the personal feed, it's as simple as this, right? You've got Lee Clow's beard, this is me following, and then a guy running underneath it, James Hancock, who posts every day 10, 15, 20 really cool clips. So for Arthur Penn's birthday, he was posting a clip of Bonnie and Clyde. That auto plays as I'm going through my feed. Think about how much more that's going to capture my attention as I go through and I'm looking at these things. I stop, and one of the things I love about Twitter as opposed to some of the other social platforms is the ability to click on that frame and see it larger on your mobile device, or click on, if there's an example, next, you know, a hashtag that we could take to other content, or even a bit.ly link that'll take you to seeing that clip inside another platform. So that open source, as opposed to a closed source that keeps me in one environment, is really, really important to me creatively, because we can start thinking about how we use assets. This is an asset that we did took from Fiat USA. It was a television commercial, but it was around Zoolander. And our ability to put this into people's feeds in a targeted way obviously got people who were interested in very specific things to see this kind of a post and then link through and see the spot. But you can see how coming up in your feed here, it's very native to the environment and to the experience you're having. And part of what's interesting to me, I don't want to kind of divert too much here, but is on television if you're watching Fargo, right? The look and the feel of that show, it fades to black, and then you know television commercials are coming. So you know that they're coming. So there's something, I don't want to call it hidden, I don't think it's surreptitious that way, but it's in your feed in a really interesting way that's just part of your engagement as you go through. So I'm not going to say it's people have their guards down. I think it's just you have the chance to grab their attention more authentically than you do in some other environments. Let's talk about telling your story early. I'll be quiet and watch this piece for Jeep. Little branding, tells you that Moab, this had been closed for a long time. Jeep Safari and Jeep for their 75th are opening it up. Now, based upon what Heather said, what we would do now with this content is put the Jeep logo right up front there, because creatively to me, it doesn't really matter that it came 4th or 5th in that edit, but if we were making that for TV, where that lived as well, or other social, this demands a re-edit for Twitter. This demands that we look at content and we go, this can play better on this platform if you as client allow us to explore doing different cuts for different places to make it stickier, because it will improve persuasion and it will be more informative. So this hits your feed. Again, we're trying to push the idea of, and I'll say it here, you'll see it on my Twitter feed, let's make better. Don't do a ton of work for no kind of sensical reason. Do curated, crafted work and get that in the feed, and it'll be stickier. Brand up front. So this is a spot where we did for Fiat for the Olympics. And I don't know if you caught it right there, it may loop. We put the Fiat logo intentionally up front here. We took a car into a loft and drew all the flags of the country of the Olympics on that car. And we made a targeted decision to put the Fiat logo up front so that you wouldn't just be watching the car be drawn on and not know what that story was in the Twitter feed. So a really clean, simple badge front at whole end, which is what we might have done for TV. But the brand up front in the video here is kind of critical to what we did. But again, inviting you to cheer is one, potentially even giving you a link to the longer content. The power of the logo. We created this spot, very little branding up front, and we actually did that knowing that US Open with their logo and the kind of description that we could put ahead, the pre-copy on this feed, could get you into the story of what we were telling here. So this was about ball boys being out in the open in New York and running around doing what they do everywhere else but the open. It was a great spot, and the success of how this was performing on Twitter and other social networks, again, got the US Open to take their inventory on TV and run this spot in a very targeted way on ESPN during the Open every single night. But here in the Twitter feed, our ability to have that logo help you understand even from the beginning what you're starting to see here was really beneficial to us. Heavy versus light branding. Just want to show you a couple of examples of this. On the left, we've got Jeep for their 75th salute, very heavy branding. This is building Jeeps, beautifully shot inside one of their, and then on the right, we've got Charles. Very little branding in these films, 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes long. They're about owning your tomorrow, ideas about people who had hit a moment in their life where they had to make a choice and why they were on the new route that they were chasing. But these are used in really different ways. This piece is now exploring from Jeep, very heavy on the branding, getting a lot of feed, and can play longer. This is my personal opinion. This kind of branded piece can play a lot longer on Twitter, and we've let the whole film play out there. Whether or not you watch it, we hope you do. We hope you stick with it, but heavy on the branding in the front and heavy branding throughout. This piece is a 2.5-minute piece. So what we had to do for Twitter, what we decided to do, was to do a 15-second teaser trailer cut down. We want you to click on that link, go to that bit.ly link, and watch the actual film on Vimeo, which is a platform in which you want to see a truly narrative documentary film. Maybe you'll watch that for 2.5 minutes there. I think to get you to watch this for Charles Schwab on this platform, because you don't know intrinsically what it's about. So instead, we're taking the catchphrase "Own Your Tomorrow," the taglines at the end, and we're trying to drive you through Twitter, because it's an open environment, to watching the film somewhere else. And that gets back to my earlier point, which is another reason I love Twitter, is because right in that environment, you can click me through on mobile directly to another link like Vimeo, where I can watch a longer film. I won't say I'll say targeted versus general. These are a couple of different promoted pieces that came up in my feed yesterday. And personally for me, coming from a filmmaking, storytelling, narrative background, which is going to kind of connect with me better? Which am I going to tell you that I kind of like more right now? Celebrity cruises. Don't follow them. It's promoted. Not exactly sure how I got targeted in my feed. But it's telling a bigger story in belief of borders are meant to be crossed with beautiful filmmaking, a filmic approach that's coming up with my feed, and I found myself naturally watching this. On the right, we've got something for passwords, LastPass, that came up in my feed, and that's not playing, or maybe it did play. It did play through. So what you see on this one is hammers and nails, something's happening, something's getting built. I have no connection to what this story is in video and how it connects to LastPass, which is the password protection company. And even at the end, you deserve to have nice things. I don't know how that connects to a password protection company. So I think this is actually kind of a loss of what you should be doing with your video in Twitter. Either create content that does work or make sure the messaging works in some way to connect you through to those stories. So those are a few examples. I hope they didn't kind of derail this too far into the creative process, but most importantly, from my perspective, it's how are we taking things like this study that we did with the labs and Twitter and using that to inform how we now approach our creative. Not even from the point of recutting for that platform, but now let's go in and do a full social campaign with and for Twitter, because that's a specific environment where we can get people to engage authentically. Now what do we make? Now what do we create? And I think that's the question we have to be working all together, no matter what discipline we're in, to bring to our clients so they can tell better stories.
I'm sorry we don't. Our next show is starting momentarily. But if you so anybody who would want to, and I'm sure many would, can approach you if you guys just set up over there. Thanks very much to Twitter.
Thanks, guys.
That was great. We appreciate your support. Thank you. Got to clear the room again. I'm sorry, but that was great. Thank you so much.